Welcome back to The Layout. This is the video layout update for February 2022. What I thought I'd do this time, instead of walking step by step through a bunch of projects I've done in the almost 10 months since I've done one of these updates, I figured I'd start at the beginning of the layout this time, actually at our St. Albans staging yard, and I would walk you through the layout. Along the way, we can talk about some of the progress that I've made, some of the projects that are underway and completed, and give you a sense of where the layout is. A little bit about the layout before we start. I don't know if I've ever said this, but this is HO scale. I'll confirm that for everybody. The room measures about 30 feet long overall by about 15 feet wide. It replicates mostly the Central Vermont Railway's Richford branch, which runs from St. Albans northeast towards the Canadian border in the town of Richford. This is from the aisle where you'd come down the stairs. This is the first view you'd get of the railroad. And you can see all the way in the distance there is the finished scenery area that I've shown several times in different photos and on previous updates. You can see the St. Albans staging yard right there. That's where that milk car is that you see through the trees. We'll start our tour over here in the staging yard area. Before I start the train up, a little bit about this. It's about 18 inches from front to back. You see two staging tracks here. These represent the Richford end of the line, so really you don't see them right now. These are the Canadian Pacific Interchange in Richford. And then behind this low row of trees, you can kind of see the roof of the boxcars, and down here you can see the other two staging tracks. That's the St. Albans staging yard, so you can see the train staged in there. The idea with the trees is to screen the staging yard. I didn't want to put a wall or a backdrop or anything completely obscuring the staging tracks. It's nice for engineers to be able to see their train moving, and then it clears the screen of trees right here and is onto the visible portion of the layout. As you can see here, the engineer can see his train moving through the staging tracks there between those trees. The locomotive assigned to our train today is Central Vermont number 472. This 280 consolidation type locomotive was actually built by a friend of mine, Ian Rice. It's a very early example of a Bachmann Spectrum 280 that has been extensively modified and detailed. Ian built the model and actually appeared in an article in Model Railroader back right after the Bachmann locomotives came out. The amount of detailing he did on this was really extensive and really amazing. The beacon feed mill in the back is actually based on a prototype in Bethel, Vermont. It needs to be painted and weathered. Doesn't really belong in this spot on the railroad. Didn't really appear on the Richford branch, but I like the building and it's an interesting structure, so I think I'll leave it here. Gone ahead and paused our train for a minute. I wanted to show you around this area of the layout. This is Berkshire, Vermont. This was, if you look on the track plan on my blog, which is www.centralvermontrailway.blogspot.com for those of you who don't know, this is on the Richford branch track plan. This was originally the staging yard area. And when Lance Mindheim designed the layout for me, we put the staging yard here. It's a fine place for a staging yard, other than the fact that it would have been a staging yard with too much staging sitting out in the middle of an otherwise scenic stretch of track. So after I laid all the tracks for the staging yard, you can still see the cork roadbed remains down here. I took it all up and replaced it with this small. This is one spot in Berkshire that will be fairly faithful to the prototype. There was a United Farmers Creamery located in Berkshire. There are a number of photos of it in the Library of Congress website, and that's what's going to go here. You see the milk car spotted here on the siding, but a wooden creamery building here. The hill will come up and the building is kind of built into the hill. We'll go ahead and continue following our train around here. You'll notice this is the spot where one of two stub-ended peninsulas jut out from into the middle of the room. This particular one is the Sheldon Falls Peninsula. It represents a paper mill complex. Some issues with the turnouts on the paper mill peninsula, actually specifically the turnout that had been located right here. One of the things I did in the last few weeks is make up this new turnout, which is custom fit to this spot. I still need to rearrange some of the track in here and the leads in and out of it. And so right now the paper mill is out of service, which is why there's a string of cars that would normally be spotted at the paper mill parked over there on the passing side. Before I get to the paper mill though, I do want to finish the scenery and background scenery in this area here. I originally considered putting a river in here and a bunch of riverfront mills or riverside mills, water-powered mill buildings. That's something I might come back to. One thing I did is I cut this piece of styrofoam here to fit in here and drop in as a base. If I wanted to at some point in the future, I suppose I could take it out and put some more structure-intensive scene in here. But for right now, I think what I'm really going to do is put just some fields, some pasture, and perhaps maybe an N-scale farm up on the hill, that green foam area up on a hill there. I think that'll be a remarkably effective and quite straightforward scene to add to this spot right here. And I've shown this area of the layout before many times, and if you've seen pictures of the finished spot on the layout, this is the area you've seen. This bridge and river that you see in the foreground here, that actually came from my last layout as the one piece of the last railroad that we salvaged, fairly intact. The mill in the background is a new addition. I actually built it while we were living in an apartment between houses. It's based on a series of drawings and pictures on the Library of Congress website, and it represents one of the last water-powered mills that was in Vermont. It's called Ben Thresher's Mill. If you want to see a fascinating documentary, go ahead and Google Ben Thresher's Mill and look for the YouTube video. You need to blend the gap in the river that you see there between the mill module or mill diorama and the old piece of the layout that we spliced in here. I think what I'm going to do is add some underwater rocks there and some white water and just try to blend the two together. The bridge girders are microengineering 50-foot girder bridges. The abutments and piers are from New England brownstone, and they're modeled to represent a prototype bridge. It was a series of photographs I found of a Central Vermont way freight going over a bridge. And the neat part about this is you can see where the granite stones have been augmented by concrete additions to the abutments. At one point, when they first built, the granite stone supported a truss bridge that was underneath the tracks. And then when the girder bridges came along, the girders weren't as deep as the trusses, so obviously they built up with the more common building material at the time, which is concrete. And they used that to support the bridge, so they basically added on to the old original stone piers and abutments. Russ Green at New England Brownstone did a wonderful job on this and actually specifically matched the prototype photos. And if you look closely, you'll notice that the two abutments do not match one another. They are noticeably different. As we watch the train run through the finished scenery over here, if it sounds like the locomotive is working harder than it was before, you're not hearing things. It is. My intention was to keep the layout level throughout, but apparently we got a little bit of a grade in here, so the locomotive engineers really have to pay attention to that as they go around this curve, or the train will just die on the hill for them. I suppose we should just call this inadvertent hill. Our intrepid photographer has jumped back in his car and raced ahead of the train and is now positioned over at the Junction scene. This is the crossing with the St. Johnsbury and Lamoille County Railroad that you see there. You can see the St. J and LC's handcar house, the yellow and maroon building. This is a spot on the layout you've seen a number of times. I'm actually in the outside aisle, or there's sort of the public viewing aisle of the layout. This is not the operator aisle. point out that I've rearranged things at this junction scene a little bit in the last few months. The St. Johnsbury interchange track used to run to this area behind this tall orange foreground tree here. And it joined back to the Richford main line at a curved turnout just in the distance there, right by that telegraph pole. Frankly, that track arrangement never really worked well for me. It always looked a little awkward. Left curved turnout with a siding that curved to the right that ended up over here in this spot. It just seemed a little strange. So what I did is I eliminated the feed mill siding that I had over here and just curved it to the foreground, to the fascia, and where you see that one boxcar sitting there, that is now the St. Johnsbury interchange track right here. It's enough to hold 2 or 3 cars. The water tank you see in the background there, that's the same spot that the water tank was in the last time I showed this. And the last time I showed this scene on a video, the Streeters building, the Streeters store building, didn't have its roof. It now has its roof, and I've started putting in some of the scenery. The road is in place. It needs to final coating of weathering. The store itself is in place. Obviously, the bridge in the background, the truss bridge in the background, still needs to be built. But that's perhaps the most significant change scenery and structure-wise in the layout in the last couple of months. I'll move the camera around and you can take a look at the back of the store, see what that looks like, and see how we had to cut into the plywood a little bit, and we actually bumped when I say we, I mean my friend Stick Harris and I. We bumped the front of the layout out here a little bit just to give some additional room for the store, a little bit of breathing room, so that we could put this area down below the store, below grade level here with the store. And this is where the garage is and the car repair area. Obviously, you still have to add all those details to that. The train is continuing its way to Richford across this 1x2 sitting on some clamped in temporary supports. This is where the Missisquoi River Bridge is going to ultimately go. As the train pulls into Enosburg Falls here, I'll swing the camera around, we can take a look around. You can see I'm working on some foreground trees. They still need to be finished and painted, obviously. And one thing I've got done here is built up the ground to the track level in the distance there behind the Worthmore feed building on the other side of the tracks. And I started positioning trees that would run down the street. So it's a residential street across from the tracks. And the goal here is to have some sort of tree-lined street that isn't something you see very often on model railroads. I've slid the camera down a little further here at Enosburg Falls, and you can see the Enosburg Falls creamery there. Covered that in a previous video. As the train comes through here, I'm going to swing the camera around, and you can see here the condensary building. This building is based on a prototype in Richmond, Vermont, excuse me. I'm not sure whether I'm ultimately going to replace this building with a model of the exact prototype. I probably will at some point in the future. I've moved the camera back inside the layout. Here you see the rear of the Enosburg Falls condensary. And you see our train here, and it's about to traverse the lead into Richford Yard itself. If it runs straight through the turnout you see directly in the foreground here, that'll take it to the Canadian Pacific interchange tracks in Richford, the Canadian Pacific track off to the left there, kind of where our journey started. And if it follows this curved track in the foreground here, it'll go into the Central Vermont's Richford Yard itself. Now that our train's arrived in Richford, let's take a quick look around. The train is sitting on the main track in Richford, and right next to that there's a passing siding or a runaround track. Where you see this tank car on this string of cars, that's a short runaround and a scale track, and then where that B&O boxcar is and the CV450, the other 280, that's actually the team track. So this area between these tracks right here will be just basically paved or gravel, a place for trucks to pull up and unload cars. There's a couple of other small industries in Richford. These are all stand-in buildings at this point, representational. They're not the final models at all. And in the distance there you see a turntable. There was actually a Y at the prototype Richford. I don't have a room for a Y on my layout. It really didn't fit. There was a turntable there many, many years ago. So we've gone ahead and recreated it here, and obviously it serves the purpose of turning the engines. Well, you see that single orange tree back there, and then you see some Walther's lumber sheds that are stand-ins right now. The largest industry here in the CV yard at the time I'm modeling was a plywood plant. And so that's where that plywood plant is going to go. Well, that's it for this month's update. I hope you've enjoyed this trip following 472 over the Richford branch. My intention is to perhaps recreate this trip next year about the same time and see what the differences are. In the meantime, I'll do some more traditional layout updates. Thanks for watching and have a great day.